What is yoga? This is such an interesting question today in the contemporary world of yoga practice and study and business. What is yoga? While there is not one correct answer to this question, there are several incorrect answers. And the first module of the teacher training explores this question in depth so that we can move forward from that point on with a thorough understanding of this word of yoga, the practice of yoga, the state or the experience of yoga, and how that definition from the perspective of the tantric tradition, of the Himalayan tradition, how that informs everything that we're going to learn and practice, and then endeavor to share in a relatively controversial world of yoga today. So let's start by looking at some of the traditional understandings of the word yoga. And then we'll also look at how that has been sort of twisted, appropriated, misconstrued, misrepresented in today's world. So the vast majority of my information is going to come through the Himalayan tradition of the Himalayan masters as currently supported and preserved and passed on by my teacher, Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat. This is adorable Panditji. This is Panditji's commentary on the first chapter of the Yoga Sutra, which was credited to have been written by a sage named Patanjali about 2,200 years ago. Panditji has written commentaries on the first 3 chapters of the Yoga Sutra, and I believe is currently working on his commentary for chapter 4. The Yoga Sutra is not the only text of traditional yoga, but it is definitely one of the seminal texts. And it is also one of the texts that is most commonly referred to within the context of our tradition when it comes to yoga. So yoga, according to the Yoga Sutra, is a state of mind in which the oscillating or roaming tendencies of the mind have become so controlled, so managed that it actually grows completely still. That the mind is able to grow completely still, and those roaming tendencies quiet long enough for the distractions, the disturbances of the mind to no longer be an obstacle or a barrier to an inner experience of oneness with something greater than the individual. I know that sounds pretty opaque, so I'll try to make it a little bit more accessible. But in order to make it more accessible and more specific, so not necessarily accessible, but specific, I have to use some words that are not necessarily familiar or comfortable for people. So our tradition of tantric yoga is at its heart a tradition of non-dualism. It is a tradition of Advaita, which means that we experience reality as singular rather than dual. We experience reality as myriad expressions of a singular reality. Divine consciousness. So every person, every animal, every rock, every idea, every emotion, every entity in reality that is perceivable, experienceable, and even beyond perception and experience is but a unique expression of one single source, the divine. And from the tradition's perspective, we refer to the divine as the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother is neither feminine or masculine, male or female, but this word mother gives us a clue as to how we are able to engage with this divinity. This is a divinity that we experience as nurturing, as nourishing, as ferocious, in terms of how, to what lengths she will go, and she will go in order to protect us, even from ourselves. So it's this benevolent, intelligent, wise, compassionate, nurturing entity of divine consciousness that is all powerful, all knowing, all present, that we refer to as the Divine Mother. Okay, so how does that tie in? Yoga, the experience of yoga, is the experience of returning to a direct experience of oneness, non-differentiation with that, with the divine. Yoga, if you just look at the word itself, comes from the root word yug, Y-U-G, which means to yoke. And to yoke means to unite, okay? To bring together two seemingly separate entities. There are some scholars that would argue that yoga is a dualistic tradition and practice, because to yoke sort of implies that there are two different entities or facets of reality that need to be brought together. Our tradition is definitely non-dual, but we also utilize the practice of yoga, the system of yoga, because we as human beings perceive ourselves as distinct, as separate from the divine. And because we believe ourselves to be unique, individuated, separate, distinct, isolated even from the divine, that's the reality that we live in, because we create our reality based on our beliefs. So as long as we carry the belief that we are separate from the totality, then that's what our reality will be. That's what our experience will be. And so yoga, from this tradition's perspective, is a system of practices, techniques, philosophies, and methodologies that help us to dissolve that belief and that experience of separation in order to come back to a very genuine, very real experience of oneness. So the end aim of yoga is a state referred to as samadhi. And samadhi, sama, one of those words there, basically means sameness. And we'll look at that in several different contexts. Sameness. And it's implying that we reach a state through meditation, because without meditation, yoga isn't yoga. We get to a point where we genuinely identify as an expression of the divine, nothing more, nothing less. So that's yoga. And yoga is both a state, like I just described in terms of samadhi, because samadhi and yoga could be considered synonymous. It's also a system of practices intended to deliver us to that state. So yoga, yes, it is asana, it is pranayama, it is pratyahara, it definitely is meditation. It is all of those practices if, and this is where it gets a little bit controversial, if they are actually bringing you closer to that ultimate state of oneness, union, absorption, dissolution into the divine. If they are doing the opposite, if they're actually causing you to become more entrenched in your distinct identity as an individual human being, if they are causing your ego to identify more and more with its individuality, if it is creating more division, more me and you, us and them, then it could be argued, and I would argue, that it's actually antithetical to yoga. And a lot of the approaches to physical fitness, and well-being, wellness. Even some of the spiritual approaches or angles of yoga are actually just causing us to become more entrenched in our individuality without the end goal of union, samadhi, being there. And that's not yoga. Yeah. So this is where it gets a little bit dicey in terms of what we call yoga and how we can identify ourselves as practitioners of yoga and ultimately as teachers of yoga. We really better know what yoga actually is, and have a very thorough understanding of it, not only on an intellectual level, but also, much more importantly, through our own direct experience, which only comes through consistent, continued practice that we engage with a tremendous amount of reverence for what it is that we're doing and what it is that all of that doing is intended to bring about. So that's the first module. Stay tuned, and we'll begin to explore module 2 and all of the others in sequence. Okay, see you soon.